I forgot to to unmute. Pardon me for that. But hey, everyone, we're back. Have some tea as I showed off. It's green tea, so a little cooler, a little less caffeine, which is nice. Very smooth, but still too hot. But there's some news. We have some news today. Some of it was from yesterday. It was just I don't figure out how I could squeeze it in. It seemed weird to try to squeeze it in when we were doing magic stuff yesterday. So instead, we're talking about it today. New Trump indictments coming down the pike. On top of that, there's also some news about Giuliani. And a bit of a surprise for y'all, I have a guest coming on later today. Should be on, should be talking to him about an hour or so to talk about local politics, which is neat. It's something that's really easy to overlook, and I think a lot of people do, myself included. So it'll be cool to talk about that with him. But we'll get to that when we get to that. For now, let's talk about some news. So in addition to Trump, who is it? Oh, it's a surprise. It's a surprise. I guess I'll hint at it. Someone who works with the organization called Pico, California. All right. I guess we'll let the important stuff out, who they work for, and what organization they're with. They're not a political candidate themselves, but they support political change, and I'll let him describe what he does because he'll certainly be better at it than I will be. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, Cam Gal. Let's get to the news. So, as we discussed previously, let me move this back to where it's supposed to be. As we discussed prior, there were additional indictments in the Trump Espionage Act case where it appeared that he was trying to have evidence destroyed. Well, this is unrelated. This is a different set of indictments. Trump was indicted for efforts to overturn the 2020 election and block the transfer of power. This is in relation to January 6th, where he stoked his supporters into a fervor, and they attempted an insurrection and a raid on the Capitol building. Thankfully, they were unsuccessful, seeing as though I would not be a fan of a dictatorial coup in this country. But now we actually have some indictments coming down from it. If you remember, there were also hearings in Congress about it to kind of a fact finding mission. Well, there's something coming of it. Let's read on. Uh, Something I will say. I did find the actual indictment, and like we did with the Espionage Act indictment, we will read over the entirety of it. It's about 45 pages, but as we learned prior, that's really not that big a deal. I'm not going to do that today though, because we have that guest coming on. So we're not going to have time to go through it all today. We'll probably do that on Monday. But the entirety of the indictment is available, and so we will go over it. For now, we'll just read an article about it, and we'll go over the totality later. Donald Trump was indicted on felony charges Tuesday for working to overturn the results of the 2020 election in the run-up to the violent riot by his supporters at the U.S. Capitol, with Justice Department acting to hold him accountable for an unprecedented effort to block the peaceful transfer of presidential power and threaten American democracy. Something I want to note about this, because in the intervening 2 years since, a lot of Trump supporters have been trying to play down what happened as like, oh, this is like really normal. It was the same as the Russia thing, which it isn't, right? Every other presidential candidate who has lost has accepted, conceded defeat, and gone home. There have been some instances where they push back through legal channels. So, for example, Bush v. Gore. Gore sued because there was some fuckery in Florida, which it seems was the case, but he was rejected by the Supreme Court and he conceded the next day, as I understand it. I'm not sure about the next day, but he conceded. Even Hillary, who Trump claims didn't give up, did concede the election. She conceded she lost, and as it turns out, the Russia hoax was not a hoax whatsoever. Trump might not personally have known about it or been involved, but his campaign provably was. This is very different, especially with a literal coup attempt. The four-court indictment, The third criminal case against Trump provided deeper insight into a dark moment that has already been the subject of exhaustive federal investigations and captivating public hearings. It chronicles a months long campaign of lies about the election results and says that, even when those falsehoods resulted in a chaotic insurrection at the Capitol, Trump sought to exploit the violence by pointing to it as a reason to further delay the counting of votes that sealed his defeat. Remember, he was trying to do everything he possibly could to run away from the fact that he lost the election. And if you care about popular votes, by a lot. He'll always he constantly points at, like, oh, the most votes of any sitting president, as though that's to say, the most votes ever, but that's not true at all. Biden had 7 million more votes than Trump. Though in this country, the popular vote isn't how things work, it's the electoral vote, but he lost in the electoral as well. In what has been described as the most secure election in all of American history. So there's that. Even in a year of rapid succession legal reckonings for Trump, Tuesday's indictment, with charges including conspiring to defraud the United States government that he once led, was stunning in its allegations that a former president assaulted the bedrock function of democracy. That is, it's stunning only if you didn't see him do it. It's more stunning that he did it than that he was accused of it. It's the first time the defeated president, who is the early frontrunner for next year's Republican presidential nomination, is facing legal consequences for his frantic but ultimately failed effort to cling to power. It's the first time, but like it's because nobody has done this before. Nobody has tried to to do a coup in America before, or at least not to any sort of success, as far as I'm aware. I will remind you also that Trump is trying to paint this as merely a political ploy, but that again, this is kind of like the previous indictment that we went over, or I guess the first indictment we went over, where that only matters if he didn't do what he was accused of, but he did. So it doesn't really matter if it's political. You did this thing. You should be held to account. And if you want to say other politicians have also broken the law, I want them indicted too. I want them charged as well. This isn't unique to any party. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6th. Oh, and by the way, the implication, by the way, is never, oh, those other people should be charged. It's always, therefore I shouldn't be either, because he doesn't care. Right? It's only about getting what he. Ooh, excuse me, hiccups. Getting getting away with what he tried to do. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021 was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy, said Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith, whose office has spent months investigating Trump. It was fueled by lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the United States government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying results of the presidential election. The Trump campaign has called the charges fake. Surprise? Does anyone surprise? Anyone? Anyone shocked by this information? I would imagine not. And asked why it took 2.5 years to bring them. So, as it turns out, investigations are necessary, and the Trump campaign also was fighting tooth and nail to not cooperate with this. This is why Bannon, who was called for the Jan 6 hearings, refused to show up and was charged with contempt of Congress and I think obstruction. I don't remember exactly what he was charged with, but I know he refused to show up and testify, which is pretty telling. And these things take time. It's 2.5 years later, but so what? This would be like there's no statute of limitations on doing a coup, I would imagine. Even if there is, it's 2.5 years is not that long. This is kind of like saying, well, how could you accuse me? Like, how could you try to charge me for murder now? I did the murder 5 years ago. That's nonsense, right? Who cares why it takes 2.5 years? He would have cried if it happened immediately. It probably took 2.5 years because they were trying to be thorough. And if it's the same office that's handling the Espionage Act stuff, it seems they were busy with all the things that you were doing. Break fewer laws, it will take less time to prosecute them, I suppose. Trump was the only person charged in Tuesday's indictment, but prosecutors obliquely referenced a half dozen co-conspirators, including lawyers inside and outside of government, who they said had worked with Trump to undo the election results. They also advanced legally dubious schemes to enlist slates of fake electors in battleground states won by Democrat Joe Biden to falsely claim that Trump had actually won them. This I didn't know about. We'll get into all of this when we read the indictment, and we'll probably do that next week. But didn't know he was trying to enlist fake electors. For anyone who's not aware, the Electoral College is not quite as simple as this state is worth this many votes, and so when when the state's majority goes one way or the other, they just get all the votes. Technically, there's a process of choosing electors to go to the Electoral College and vote in person. It is expected that those electors will vote in the same way that their state has voted, but there's not a requirement for that. That's not necessarily how things have to be. It would be kind of an issue if they did in terms of public reaction, but technically they don't have to. And so that's who these electors are. That's who he was trying to send in to skew the vote. The indictment accuses the defeated president and his allies of trying to exploit the violence and chaos by calling lawmakers into the evening on January 6th to delay the certification of Biden's victory. If you recall, on that day, Trump was, giving a speech wherein he was pretty clearly stoking the crowd into a fervor. He was saying, like, let's go, we're going to go march, I'll go march down right there with you to the Capitol, we'll make them do the thing, and, it's, we have to take back our country because they're trying to, it was all really inflammatory rhetoric that was pretty clear, and, like, you don't have to say go riot, but when you stoke people into a fervor, point them in a direction, and then just let them go, what else is going to happen? And then once the violence started, he was really slow to condemn. He was just like, oh, we love you, but go home. After like 5 hours or so. Like it was, or maybe not that long, but after like a long time. And before that, like refusing to say anything, refusing to call them off. It was pretty bad. He clearly seemed to think at the time, at least in my opinion, that there was a chance of success here, and he wanted the opportunity to capitalize on that. If the coup were successful, he wanted to be able to be like, yeah, see, I led you, and this is good, and now I'll be your president for life or whatever. And so he couldn't condemn it until it was pretty clear that it was going to be unsuccessful. He does this a lot. He also did this with the Charlottesville thing, where he refused to condemn the literal Nazis and white supremacists that were protesting until he was called out on it, and then like a week later, when it was already too late for it to be meaningful, he like does some like pays some lip service to like, oh, obviously they should be condemned completely. That's why I didn't do it for a week. It also cites and what I mean to point out there is just this tendency towards wanting to, like, hoping to get away with stuff, right? It was like, oh, I can just get away with this, and then it's not wanting to admit that he's lost, and he waits and waits, and then it's too late, and he'll say the thing, because he wanted to just get away with it. He wanted to just have those people understand what he was saying and continue to support him. And in this case, he was hoping the coup would be successful. It also cites handwritten notes from former Vice President Mike Pence that give gravitas to Trump's relentless goading to reject the electoral votes. Oh, Mike Pence. Oh, there's so much to say about Mike Pence here. So if you recall, on January 6th, Mike Pence, the rioters wanted to hang him. They were chanting "Hang Mike Pence." They had like fake gallows with him in effigy there. I don't know if they actually had built an actual gallows. They had the tools to do it, and they were screaming like "Hang Mike Pence" as they were busting in. They were upset at him because he wasn't refusing to certify the election, a thing he's not allowed to do. a power he doesn't really have, but they wanted him to exert it anyway. He didn't really oppose very much. People like try to give him credit for like, oh, he was opposing the insurrection or whatever. Yeah, because they were literally trying to kill him. That's not really brave or honorable or like standing with the Constitution. If they weren't trying to kill you specifically, maybe you would have acted differently. We have no way of knowing. But also like hasn't really condemned Trump to this point until this indictment came down where he's like, ah, that's right, you can't violate the election. It's obviously just a political thing, right? Like he wasn't gonna wrong Trump even when his supporters were trying to have him hanged. And it's only when like, okay, the indictment's coming down, it seems like Trump might not be a political candidate going forward. Now I can speak out. I don't trust anything that comes out of Pence. I wouldn't put any stock in him, even if you're like, oh, but he didn't side with Trump. Well, he couldn't side with Trump in any meaningful way, and because of that, now he's opposed to Trump after Trump like tried to have him killed indirectly. Pence, who is challenging Trump for the GOP presidential nomination. Oh yeah, that's the other part. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, there it is. Declined overtures from a House panel that investigated the insurrection and sought to avoid testifying before the special counsel. Yeah, see, this is what I mean. He wasn't making any active efforts until like, oh, now it's safe politically to do that. Now that he's not actually opposed to what happened. He is opposed to himself getting killed, and he's opposed to being politically hurt in the public eye. But now that he's challenging Trump for the nomination, well, now we can speak out. Now we can say it's wrong. That what Trump did was wrong. He appeared only after losing a court fight, with prosecutors learning that Trump, in one conversation, derided him as too honest to stop the certification. So yeah, Trump is due in court Thursday, the first step in a legal. So that would be today, I believe. This came out. When's this article? The second. Yeah. So he's expected in court today. The first step in a legal process that will play out in a courthouse situated between the White House he once controlled and the Capitol his supporters once stormed. The case is already being dismissed by the former president and his supporters, of course, obviously, and even some of his rivals as just another politically motivated prosecution. Again, this ignores the question of whether this is a crime, which it is, and whether he did it, which he did. Given that that's the case, I don't care. Who cares if it's politically motivated? So what? Why does that matter at all? Shouldn't we prosecute people who break the law, even if there's political motivation behind doing it? Obviously, his supporters don't actually care when they say this. They don't care. The only problem they have is that Trump is being indicted, and they gotta stand with Daddy Trump. That's the totality of it, and they'll make up any excuse as to why it's illegitimate, even if it doesn't make any sense. Yet the case stems from one of the most serious threats to American democracy in modern history. The indictment centers on the turbulent 2 months after the November 2020 election, in which Trump refused to accept his loss and spread lies that victory was stolen from him. The turmoil resulted in the riot at the Capitol when Trump loyalists violently broke into the building, attacked police officers, and disrupted the congressional counting of electoral votes. Also made efforts to literally murder Congress people. That's why Ashley Babbitt was shot, because she was breaking through the last barrier between the rioters and the Congress people who were making their way to safety. All of them being pretty clear about their intent to kill, at the very least, certain Congress people, notably like Pelosi, and they were all chanting "Hang Mike Pence" and things like that. Like that's why she was shot. In between the election and the riot, Trump urged local election officials to undo voting results in their states. Oh, remember the, quote, perfect phone call, unquote, where he's like, listen, I just want you to find these votes. Like, the implication is obvious, but he's so stupid. He thinks everyone else is as dumb as he is. And so, like, oh, that's plausible deniability. Everyone knows what you're saying. Everyone knows what you're saying? Everyone. You're not smart. Pressured Pence to halt the certification of electoral votes, a thing he's not allowed to do. Pence, that is, and falsely claimed that the election had been stolen, a notion repeatedly rejected by judges. By the way, this repeated rejection is kind of interesting because as much as the Trump administration, Trump supporters have claimed that there's like this election fuckery or what or that. Ultimately, the court cases they tried are much smaller in number than the events they say happened, because they know they weren't real, and every single one of those was rejected in court, like in obvious ways. There was not election fraud in any meaningful way. The only election fraud that was noted in like any meaningful numbers were Trump supporters trying to either get him elected or prove that there could be voter fraud, and then got caught doing it. Among those lies, prosecutors say, were claims that more than 10,000 dead voters had voted in Georgia, along with tens of thousands of double votes in Nevada. So this is something that gets talked about a lot. The dead voters thing. Not okay. This number is almost certainly not real, but yeah, every election has some number of people who have voted in it that are dead, and you go, oh, isn't that proof that there's rampant voter fraud? Not necessarily. People vote by mail all the time, a thing that Trump was opposed to because he knows more Democrats were likely to do it than Republicans. Because Democrats tended to be more concerned about COVID, a real thing that is real. Uh, but as was noted at the time, like, okay, sometimes someone will vote by mail, and in the time it takes to get in will die. Did a dead person vote? Well, not while they were dead, and it wasn't a fraudulent vote. Should that be counted? That's something that I think is a more nuanced question that people make it obvious, but it's not anything untoward happening. Each claim has been rebutted by courts or state or federal officials, the indictment says. Yeah, every single one. Prosecutors say Trump knew his claims of having won the election were false, but he repeated and widely disseminated them anyway to make his knowingly false claims appear legitimate, to create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger, and to erode public faith in the administration of the election. Yeah, something to note is something that came out in the Jan 6 hearings was that Trump knew that the election was not fraudulent or stolen. He knew that what he was saying was untrue. It's not just it would have been bad enough if he believed the election was stolen and was stoking that, but it's worse still that he knew it wasn't and he was saying it anyway. He knew what the reaction he was trying to evoke, and then got. Ooh, very smooth. The document carefully outlined arguments that Trump has been making to defend his conduct, that he had every right to challenge the results, to use the courts, to even lie about it in the process. So some of this is true. You do have a right to challenge the results through legal means, like using the courts. If there is in fact voter fraud, you have every legal right to challenge the results in court, which they did, but none of those are instances of voter fraud. And also the number and the attempt at that was obviously disingenuous because they knew that they were lying about it. But obviously to lie about it in the process is definitely not your right. But in stark detail, the indictment outlines how the former president instead took criminal steps to reverse the clear verdict voters had rendered. The indictment had been expected since Trump said in mid-July that the Justice Department had informed him he was the target of its investigation. Okay, so he's complaining about it taking 2.5 years, but he knew... Oh, I guess, sorry, mid-July this year, probably. Never mind. I was going to say, but he knew since last year, but no, it's probably this July. But also the congressional hearings were much before that. A bipartisan House committee that spent months investigating the run-up to the Capitol riot also recommended prosecuting Trump on charges, including aiding an insurrection and obstructing an official proceeding. The indictment includes charges of conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to obstruct an official proceeding, obstructing an official proceeding, and violating a post-Civil War Reconstruction-era civil rights statute that makes it a crime to conspire to violate rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution, in this case, the right to vote. God, I hate the Webster comma. It's such a small thing, but like I prefer there should be a comma right here. It's the Oxford comma. It like weirdly conjoins these two, and especially when the last item in the list is so long. It's more than half the paragraph. This is just like a personal grammatical thing, but God, use the Oxford comma. The mounting criminal cases are unfolding in the heat of a 2024 race. A conviction in this case or in any other would not prevent Trump from pursuing the White House or serving as president, though Trump as president could theoretically appoint an attorney general to dismiss the charges or potentially try to pardon himself. They say try here because it's unclear, as I've mentioned before, whether a president can pardon himself. In New York, state prosecutors have charged Trump with falsifying business records about a hush money payoff to a porn actor before the 2016 election. The trial is set to begin in March. This is the first time we haven't covered this, but this is the Stormy Daniels stuff. In Florida, the Justice Department has brought more than 36 felony counts, accusing him of illegal processing classified documents after leaving the White House and concealing them from investigators. That trial begins in May. It's been pushed back, as we learned recently. Prosecutors in Georgia are also investigating efforts by Trump and his allies to reverse his election loss to Biden there. The district attorney of Fulton County is expected to announce charging decisions within weeks. I'd also heard that district attorney has said publicly that Trump will not receive any special treatment and will have his mugshot taken if it comes to this point, which is interesting. Smith's team has cast a broad net as part of his federal investigation, with his team questioning senior Trump administration officials, including Pence, before a grand jury in Washington. Prosecutors also interviewed election officials in Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and other battleground states won by Biden who were pressured by the Trump team to change the voting results. By the way, without the Electoral College, this becomes a lot harder because it's not just a few medium-sized states that you need to mess with the election results in. You would need, if it were like popular vote, which isn't ideal either. If it were popular vote, he would have needed to fabricate like 7 million votes or more. That would have been much harder. Though I'm not a proponent of popular vote. I prefer actually ranked choice voting. Though I could be convinced of other methods as well. It's not really super important here. Rudy Giuliani, who we will read about in just a moment, a Trump lawyer who pursued post-election legal charges, spoke voluntarily to prosecutors. Giuliani was not named in the indictment, but appears to match the description of one of the co-conspirators. A spokesman for Giuliani said Tuesday night that Trump had a good faith basis. This is just not true. This is a lie. For the actions he took. Attorney General Merrick Garland last year appointed Smith, an international war crimes prosecutor who also led the Justice Department's public corruption section, as special counsel to investigate efforts to undo the election as well as Trump's retention of classified documents at his Florida home Mar-a-Lago. Although Trump has derided him as deranged and called him politically motivated, Trump's past experience includes overseeing significant prosecutions against high-profile Democrats. I guess it's important to note that, obviously this is untrue, but obviously, I prefer going the other direction. Trump is saying this because he's being accused of something, not because there's any merit to it. It's motivated. That's the same thing with the deranged comment. Anytime Trump starts going off on the internet about how something is crazy or stupid or how someone's deranged or he's being a target, it's almost certainly because he's feeling guilty and worried about the consequences of his actions coming back to bite him. It's happened pretty consistently recently. The Justice Department's investigation began well before Smith's appointment, proceeding alongside separate criminal probes into the rioters themselves. More than 1,000 people have been charged in connection with the insurrection, including some with seditious conspiracy. Not nearly enough, if you ask me. Some of those people are members of Congress that were on board for this. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene. But I'm glad that we're starting to get some pushback against the actively anti-democratic wing of the right that are, mostly Trump supporters, but not exclusively. DeSantis supporters are not fans of democracy either. This is just the most blatant anti-democratic action that has been taken in living memory or possibly ever. I guess the Civil War is probably worse. But yeah, so Trump being charged with stuff related to Jan 6. As I say, next week we will go through the indictment. But for now, we got about a half hour before our guest is ready to join us. So now we're going to shift topics and we're talking about Giuliani. Someone mentioned in that last article, though only in passing, Trump's former lawyer. I'm not sure if he's still on the Trump legal team. I think he's not because I've heard that he's not actually a lawyer anymore. I've heard that there's like he's had his like he was disbarred or something. But that might have just been hearsay. Don't take me on that. Actually, let's look it up. I had heard. Okay, no, he's okay. His license is temporarily suspended, and possibly will be revoked. Okay, so for now he's still a lawyer. Former mayor of New York is being accused of sexual abuse. Uh, quote, "Come here, big tits," end quote. Rudy Giuliani's sex abuse accuser has the tapes. So Rudy Giuliani was caught on audio tape spewing vulgar comments toward a woman who had since accused him of sexual harassment and sexual abuse, according to the new transcripts filed in the New York Supreme Court by lawyers for his accuser. Anyone who's seen Borat 2 should not be surprised by this. In case anyone's unfamiliar, there's a scene there where like Borat's daughter, who played by an actress whose name I'm forgetting, but is brilliant in that movie. Uh, and she's like kind of flirting with him or whatever, and she's like supposed to be really young, but she looks older than 18 even in the movie. But like she's like flirting with him a little bit in the interview, and he's being like kind of weird and like implying that they should keep drinking, and then like invites himself into the bedroom of that hotel and starts taking off his belt. It's really weird. He has since claimed that he didn't do anything inappropriate, to which the response has generally been, if you think what you did was appropriate, I'm really worried about what you think is inappropriate. And so now we see, as it turns out, they just caught him being like he is. Noel Dunphy sued the former New York City mayor for $10 million in May, filing a 70-page complaint chock full of graphic allegations and text messages. We will be reading some. I know there are some in this article, like glanced ahead. Just know that that's coming. There's nothing visual, it's just a transcript, but obviously, as you see from the excerpt in the headline, it's sexual harassment. It's not pleasant. I guess I should have said as much before I read the headline, but here we are. She alleged Giuliani forced her to have oral sex and intercourse with him, in addition to making sexist, racist, drunken, and anti-Semitic remarks when she worked for him from 2019 to 2021. She also revealed that she recorded some of their interactions. I didn't fully expect the actual like rape and sexual assault here. But like these remarks are not surprising to me so much as, well, I'm glad we're getting to find out about them now. Obviously, he would say this kind of stuff. I'm kind of curious about these recordings because in some part, so recording laws aren't consistent as I understand. It's a state by state thing. Some states require two-party consent. Basically, both all parties being recorded need to be aware that they're being recorded and consent to being recorded. This is part. This is why when you call customer service, they'll tell you, "Oh, this might be recorded for future." They have to tell you, and like your consent is implied. And I think you might be able to opt out of being recorded, but I'm not sure. So I'm curious, like whether these recordings are admissible. Maybe we'll say later. Giuliani's legal team has previously told the Daily Beast that he categorically denies all of the allegations of this frivolous complaint. Obviously, doesn't really mean anything. In fact, there's a saying I had heard. It was supposedly well known, but I've never heard anyone actually say it, which is that never believe anything until it's been officially denied. On Wednesday, Ted Goodman, a political advisor to Giuliani, told the Daily Beast that Dunphy and Giuliani shared a consensual relationship. This is normally how this goes. He can't prove it didn't happen, so he's like, no, it was consensual. And that Dunphy was making harassment claims against men for the purpose of making money. Another very, very common retort to very frequently credible accusations of sexual misconduct. New transcripts, filed Tuesday and certified by a court reporting agency, just revealed a small glimpse into what Dunphy alleges were Giuliani's sexual advances and lewd remarks. Quote, "Come here, big tits. Come here, big tits. Your tits belong to me. Give them to me, indiscernible. I want to claim my tits. I want to claim my tits. I want to claim my tits. These are my tits." End quote. Oh my god, it's so gross. It's not just it's gross for what it is. It's gross for what it's doing, and it's gross for like who talks like that. It's so It's I am cringing pretty hard over here. That's who who that's rough. And there's going to be more, and it's going to be just like that. Giuliani said in one March 12th, 2019 exchange, according to a transcript labeled Exhibit 14. Oh, here's more of it. Quote, "These breasts belong to me. No one else can get near these, okay? I don't care if they're flirting or they give you business cards. These are mine. You got it?" He continued. End quote. He continued. Quote, "Understand? I'm very fucking positive. I've gone easy on you." End quote. This is also kind of telling of like kind of person who would say things like this, and the kind of person who would do things like this is the same kind of person. Like he's extremely controlling, right? It's not just that he's sexually harassing, but like it's ownership, it's property. These belong to me. You have no rights to this. I don't care what's going on. I've been easy on you because you've violated this. It's abuse. This is also emotional abuse in addition to the sexual abuse. As Giuliani, and I want to be clear, because I feel like I've digressed a bit from the like sexual. I'm hoping the obviousness of how terrible the sexual abuse and harassment is, that I don't need to comment on it further. I'm trying only to add to the disgustingness of what we're seeing here, not to distract and say like, oh, this is actually the thing that's bad. No, obviously, the sexual abuse is the worst part, but it's also emotional abuse, which is bad enough itself. As Giuliani stressed to Dunphy that "I've been easy on you," she responded, "I don't know, and you're pretty tough on me," according to the transcript. When Giuliani again demanded "give them to me," referring to Dunphy's breasts, she replied "maybe" before the transcript cuts off. So we've seen most of it, but we might as well read the transcript. "Mr. Giuliani, come here, big tits. Come here, big tits. Your tits belong to me. Give them to me." Something. "I want to claim my tits. I want to claim my tits. I want to claim my tits. These are my tits." It's so gross and so oh my god, it's really Mrs. Dunphy. Oh yeah, oh yeah. I don't know. It's hard to infer tone. "Mr. Giuliani, these breasts belong to me. Nobody else can get near these, okay? I don't care if they're flirting with you or they give you business cards. These are mine. You got it? Mine. You got it?" Miss Dunphy. "Yes." Mr. Giuliani. "Understand? I'm very fucking positive. I've gone easy on you." Miss Dunphy. "I don't know." Mr. Giuliani. "I've been easy on you." Miss Dunphy. "You're pretty tough on me." Mr. Giuliani. "I've been easy on you. Give them to me." Miss Dunphy. "Maybe." The way it cuts off is probably more to that sentence, but this is where the transcript cuts off, apparently. I don't know. In other transcripts, maybe she's trying to change the subject. She's like, maybe we should get back to this thing. Like, that might be why it's not here, and it might not be relevant going after that. In other transcripts, Giuliani appeared to emphasize to Dunphy that I quote, "I want to own you," end quote, calling her my bitch and "you're my whore, you're my fucking slut." Another like, yeah, it's this is like very obviously abuser language. It's pretty rough to read. Another transcript from March 4th, 2019 shows Giuliani and Dunphy seemingly engaging in a role play in which Giuliani fantasizes about Dunphy as "my little girl." Gross. Absolutely gross. Now, I know age play can be a thing, but this fucker is like thinking about Epstein shit. Like that, yeah, I don't know. And like yeah, I don't know. That's really gross. I just don't have other words other than this is nasty. This is disgusting. TMI. Yeah. Oh, it's gonna be a lot of that. I mean, that's how sexual assault allegations are going to be, Kim Gal. Yeah, I know it's rough, but it's just gonna be how it is. But yeah, that's really gross. Quote, "Let the doorman wait outside to bring you the luggage. Wait, wait. We need a little time alone. Yeah, I need a little time alone with my girlfriend here." End quote. Giuliani said in a transcript labeled Exhibit 13. "Oh no, quote, with my daughter, with my little girl. Oh, that's so much worse than I thought it was. Ew. That's disgusting. Clearly the Trump influence uh coming through here. Trump, who is on record as saying that like he wants to bang Ivanka. That is absolutely disgusting. I guess that's what you get from people like this. Mr. Giuliani, every place. Miss Dunphy, you are finding a little place in the woods. Mr. Giuliani, get off the airplane in a new city. Miss Dunphy, on the airplane. Mr. Giuliani, go right to the hotel. Give me the indiscernible money. Miss Dunphy, on the dining room table. Mr. Giuliani, yeah, and we go right ahead wherever. On the floor of the living room as soon as we get in. We don't even make it to the bedroom. Miss Dunphy, yes. Mr. Giuliani, all of the clothes come off. Miss Dunphy, oh yes, oh God. Mr. Giuliani, let the doorman wait outside to bring the luggage. Wait, we need a little time alone. Yeah, I need a little alone time with my girlfriend here. Miss Dunphy, that's right. Mr. Giuliani, with my daughter. Miss Dunphy, that's right. Mr. Giuliani, with my little girl. Miss Dunphy, that was in the, and it trails off. Oh wow. One thing that I expect this might be why Giuliani's saying this is a consensual relationship is you see here like he's not like he seems to be talking about having sex ahead of the actual event, not like it's happening right now, but like, oh, we will get to this point and we'll do it. And it's not like, oh, I'm literally forcing myself on you in this moment. You agreed in some implicit sense, not realizing, not like factoring in the enormous power dynamic of she literally works for you, my dude, and you're the president's lawyer to a president who like is super comfortable breaking the law constantly to do it, and like in on the right where like power wielding power is just what they do. They don't care about whether it's right or wrong. Like just all of the power dynamics just I assume he's just not paying attention to, and this is the kind of coercion that exists here of like what the hell is she going to do? She says no, he could ruin her life. This is kind of in the same way that people say like, oh, can you really leave that job you hate? Aren't you free to do that? Well, I mean, if I do, there's the threat of homelessness and starvation. That's pretty coercive, isn't it? It's the same kind of thing, only more direct because Giuliani is the kind of guy that you could expect to be really spiteful. I mean, he's talking about owning her. You really think if she rejected him in any way, he wouldn't try to lash back with everything he has? I think he would. And so like that's the kind of coercion that I'm expecting is going on here. In a transcript from August 18th, 2019 exchange, Giuliani allegedly went on a rant about how Dunphy was so smart and had so much potential as he graphically described this tremendous attraction to you physically. Quote, I can't think about you or I get hard. Even if I think about how smart you are, I'll get hard. Why would that be a thing that's like that would detract? Like you can tell he's like, oh, like he doesn't think smart women are like attractive, just metaphysically in a way. Like I don't know, smart girls are where it's at. I don't know. Continuing the quote, I'd never think about a girl being smart. If you told me a girl was smart, I would often think she's not attractive. Oh, I guess I didn't have to end quote. I guess I didn't have to say any of that. He'll say it for me. Absolutely just I guess what we should expect. He said, according to the transcript, Mr. Giuliani, indiscernible, you make me feel better when I'm upset. I hope I make you feel better when you're upset. Miss Dunphy, you do. Mr. Giuliani, indiscernible. So smart, so much potential, indiscernible. This tremendous attraction to you physically. I can't think about you or I get hard. Even if I think about how smart you are, I'll get hard. I'd never think about a girl being smart. If you told me a girl was smart, I would often think she's not attractive, indiscernible. Yeah, wow, gross. It's interesting too that like even like the first part of this exchange, that's actually kind of in the right kind of circumstance could be kind of nice of like, hey, you know what? When I'm upset, you make me feel better, and I appreciate that. You know, well, he doesn't say he appreciates it, but then he like expects the compliment in return, Right? I hope I make you feel better when you're upset. And like, what else are you gonna do? And then say it, and then immediately transition to sexual harassment again. Other transcripts seem to confirm additional allegations from Dunphy's complaint, including anti-Semitic comments in which Giuliani said Jewish people need to get over the Passover, and Jewish men have small cocks because they can't use them after they get married. Anyone surprised? Nope. Cool. Moving on. Dunphy's suit alleges Giuliani took advantage of her reliance on him to manipulate her into unwanted sexual relationships. See what I mean? It's took advantage of her reliance on him. That's exactly what I was talking about. That included instances of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, and rape. Giuliani has not been charged with any criminal offenses related to Dunphy's allegations. That's a little weird. They might not be provable. The standards for criminal conviction are more strict than for civil cases, as I understand. You know, you need beyond a reasonable doubt and a unanimous jury, as opposed to more likely than not and a majority of the jury. I'm not sure about the standards, but as I understand it, that's what they are. In a Wednesday statement, Dunphy's lawyer, Justin Kelton, said the transcripts provided a detailed view into exactly the type of conduct that Miss Dunphy experienced. More evidence will come out as this lawsuit proceeds, but these transcripts demonstrate that Mr. Giuliani and his team have not been candid in their court filings and public statements about the case. Kelton said, I mean, they're not going to be like, yeah, so I did the sexual assaults and a rape. I did that. They're not going to say that. They're just not. We look forward to the day when he testifies about these issues under oath. Yeah, me too. You know what? Me too, buddy. The revelations only. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't take the stand. When you're the defendant in a case, you are under no obligation to take the stand, as I understand it. So I wouldn't be surprised if the defense just doesn't call him. I don't think the prosecution's allowed to. And of course, there's like Fifth Amendment stuff, right? The right not to incriminate yourself. The revelations only add to a rapid growing pile of legal troubles for Giuliani, the former tough-on-crime federal prosecutor who went on to become America's mayor during 9/11. He was just like there at the time. Like anyone who was the mayor then probably would have had this reputation. Maybe he did particularly well in the fallout, in which case like great, but just remember like just because he had this reputation doesn't mean he's a good person, as we're seeing. He appeared to be one of the 6 unnamed co-conspirators referenced at length in the indictment filed Tuesday against Donald Trump in relation to Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. According to Dunphy's lawsuit, Giuliani told Dunphy of plans to claim there was widespread voter fraud if Trump lost the 2020 election, although none of the transcripts released so far mention the topic. If this is true, that would be pretty interesting evidence in the Trump case. Just like to have plans of what you're going to claim before there's any evidence is additional proof that they weren't trying to like shed light on a real problem. They were trying to lie to stoke fervor and steal the election themselves. That's a great irony. I guess it's the every accusation is a confession thing again, that the Trump campaign talks about like stop the steal when they were the ones trying to steal the election. But to the issue at hand, yeah, Rudy Giuliani, really fucking gross. Every part of this was worse than the last. Apparently, very, very clearly sexually harassing and sexually abusing his subordinate. Very clearly abusive and emotionally as well. Very possessive and oh, this is a big one. The very weird with what he finds appealing. That is super gross. Oh my. So yeah, that's that. I don't want to look at this anymore. In about 10 minutes or so, we'll have our guest come on. We should cleanse the palate, as it were, not have that so much on our mind. Jeez, that was harder to read than I thought it was going to be. That was rough. Let me tell you. Whew. All right, chat. So how's everyone doing today? We can just chat for like 10 minutes or so while we wait for our guest. He said he should be free around 3. I'll just let him know that I'm ready. This is exciting too because how do we know it's true? Which part? The Giuliani allegations? If you mean the Giuliani allegations, while we were reading transcripts, those are transcripts of audio recordings. It's not someone just wrote this down. This is a recording of Giuliani saying it out loud with his mouth. Uh, yeah, as I understand it, that's how we know that it's true. Oh, now obviously we don't have access to those audio recordings, only these transcripts. But if you see here, uh, remember we were talking about the recording laws? Yeah. So she also revealed that she recorded. Yeah, she also revealed that she recorded some of their interactions. These transcripts are from these recorded. Did they release the actual audio? I don't think so. I don't think so. Oh, you can see the transcripts in full. Maybe we'll do that. Um. Oh, wow. There's some slurs. I don't. It doesn't seem like the actual audio recording is accessible. But maybe we can find some more stuff in these transcripts because here's the full text of the transcripts. Yeah, here. I want to own you officially, legally, with a document. Oh my god. We read all this. Here's one. Miss Dunphy, who were the other Republicans who are celebrities? Giuliani. Ain't too many. Brad, not Brad Pitt. The other guy that looks like him. Bradley Cooper? No, the other one. What the hell's his name? Well, Matt Damon is very liberal. No, Matt Damon. Matt Damon is a. I think you can fill in the three-letter slur that starts with an F here. Matt Damon is also 5'2", eyes are blue, coochie 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 coo. Gross. You're my bitch. You're my whore. You're my fucking slut. Great, great, awful, terrible. Uh, Mr. Giuliani, Jews, they want to go through that freaking Passover all the time. Man, oh man, get over the Passover. It was like 3,000 years ago. Okay, the Red Sea parted. Big deal. Not the first time that happened. Funny story. Yeah, it was supposed to be, actually. That's not. Supposedly that's the thing that has. Like, I know this is the least relevant part of this, but like, what? That's such a weird complaint. Um, yeah, the natural selection works. Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah. So as I understand, no, the audio recordings are not released. This maybe.
For many years, many people have asked, will Fox News anchors, particularly the has announced Monday, that's after $1 billion in potential penalty.
Oh, this is from April. This is just not even. This is just not even remotely related. I wouldn't be surprised if we never hear the audio. It's just the kind of thing like I don't know. That might be like I don't know. It's evidence. I don't know. It feels weird if they did release it. Um, oh, here's more transcripts. That said, if these are legal transcripts, which they seem to be, right? Like this is from the Supreme Court. They're not going to record. They're not going to. The court's not going to admit. They're not going to admit transcripts that don't correspond. Right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into admitting stuff as evidence. Apparently, there's a lot more to these transcripts. Maybe we'll hold this, and maybe we'll go over this next week as well. Uh, we've read a lot of it, and probably the worst of it. Okay, seems like these transcripts are pretty short, but like you see how much goes into this. It's not just like they can just write it down and that's admissible now. Okay, it seems like we got the majority of what's in here. Yeah. So no, we don't have access to the actual recordings, but these transcripts are pretty reliable, I would think. It's one of those like people might reject the authenticity here, but I think at that point you're like, there's just not a standard of evidence that is acceptable other than, because then at that point you can be like, how do we know these recordings are really him, or like how do we know that him, like you could never really prove anything. Like if, certified by a court of law as containing what's in the recordings. Yeah, I know you were. I was just like, I was arguing with the devil's advocate in my head. I know, Kim Gal. I wasn't trying to accuse you of anything. Um, yeah, it seems like no, the actual recordings are not available. But those transcripts, we've read all of what's in these transcripts, so we don't need to go over this on another day. All we have to go over later is the Jan 6 indictment. So I guess in preparation for our guest coming on, we can start looking at Pico, California, the organization that he works for. This is a local politics oriented political movement or a political group. Who we are. I'm gonna let our guests tell us more about Pico because he'll do a better job than I will, but we can at least do a little bit looking into it. Pico, California is the largest faith-based community organizing network in the state. Our network is made up of 9 local affiliates who organize across 18 counties, representing 500 congregations and nearly 650,000 Californians. I didn't realize they were faith-based. That's interesting. I do remember him mentioning to me in a previous instance of our discussion that there's a lot of religious communities that kind of feel left out because religiosity tends to be like assumed as right wing. Like if you're religious, you're assumed to be on the right, where there are a lot of religious people that just aren't and are kind of like left out of the political conversation. So I guess that might be why there's this why they're a faith-based community organizing network. Our mission is to catalyze faith-based and spiritually centered people power in spiritually centered people power in California to create systemic change for the most vulnerable so that all Californians thrive. Founded in 1994 as a fiscally sponsored project of the National Faith in Action Network and spun off as an independent 501c3 nonprofit in 2021, along with 501c4 Pico California Action Fund, we are a network of organizations that, through community organizing, builds power across race, faith, and class with congregations and faith-based spirituality rooted individuals who take action for racial and economic justice in California. Our vision is a moral economy for California, which includes structural campaigns that result in significant material improvements for the most vulnerable Californians, making affordable and dignified housing a human right, reducing the number of people incarcerated, and increasing job and housing opportunities for those returning home, creating conditions for low-income workers to thrive in family-sustaining jobs, funding schools and communities more than law enforcement and prison, ensuring inclusion of all immigrants and refugees, and creating a government that is effective in caring for all Californians. By the way, this sentence, which is very long, demonstrates the value of the Oxford comma because they were ands in some of the items on this list, but because of this Oxford comma, we can understand what things are connected and what things aren't. My little aside. But that sounds really good. These are all things that I really like. Being a lefty myself, let's see, making affordable and dignified housing a human right, hell yeah. Reducing the number of people incarcerated, sweet. Increasing the job and housing opportunities for those returning home, phenomenal. One of the problems that has been noted about being released from incarceration is that you're just kind of let out the door. They don't like you don't get a ride back home. You don't have like a place that you can't like arrange for housing. You just like goodbye. That's it. And just left in the middle of nowhere. And it's just one of those like, okay, well, is there a surprise that there's this issue with recidivism? Well, you have no access to a job or housing. You're just sometimes just in the middle of nowhere. Obviously, not all prisons in the middle of nowhere, but like sometimes you're just stranded and like yeah, it's kind of hard to start from actual nothing. This is a great idea. Creating conditions for low-income workers to thrive in family-sustaining jobs. Hell yeah! Something that's been noted is that, you know, it wasn't that long ago that a person without a college degree could sustain a family of 4 on the job that they got, and that was just normal. Now, even with um, postgraduate degrees, people struggle to provide for their family. Funding schools and communities, hell yeah. More than law enforcement and prisons, yes. We There's an incarceration state in this country, and it's a problem. Ensuring inclusion of all immigrants and refugees, hell yeah. And creating government that is effective in caring for all Californians. These are all great things. I like it. And we're going to be speaking with someone who works for Pico and talking about what it is they do and how they do it and all this other stuff. We're just going to have a chat. We'll see. Should be good at 3, depending on 305. Let me see. I'm gonna have to do a little bit of fiddling with my layout so we can get him on camera, on screen here. But I do want to do that. Put him right up there at the top. Let's see if he's ready. He has a lot of meetings as part of his day. As when I was talking with him and planning this out, he mentioned it's between meetings and when he has time and all this stuff. Political action is a lot of work, and it involves a lot of meetings and trying to coordinate and get things done, and so that's how it is. So should be on in just a few minutes. I still have tea left, so I'll have tea for our conversation. I don't know why, but I wanted to make sure I had tea for when a guest came on. I don't know. It seems it's part of my brand, I guess. How did you meet him? Kind of a convoluted way, but uh, I guess I shouldn't like do too much doxing. We happen to be personal friends, um, from other stuff. But he works in this, and I figured, well, we have a stream. I talk about political stuff all the time. Why don't we talk about some local politics and see, and spread the word on your scene. Uh, all right, he seems to be ready to go. Should be hopping in just a moment. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
What's up, dude?
I'm doing well. How are things with you?
Good, man. Can you see me?
I can. Let me adjust my. Let me get you on camera on my actual stream here.
Yeah, do it.
But while I'm doing that, I'm actually gonna have to restart this. Why don't you? Could you do me a favor? Could you introduce yourself to people hanging out in chat and people who are watching this in the future? Name, pronouns, what it is you do, while I
You,
fiddle with OBS.
you got it. Is it easier for me to do that now, or you want me to do it when I get on stream?
Oh no, you're on stream right now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
I'm on
yeah.
stream.
I'm just putting your actual face on the stream. So while I fiddle with that, please go ahead.
Yeah, you got it, man. My name is Calvin Kiobasi. I am the Director of Communications and Narrative for Pico, California. We are the largest faith-based organizing network in California, and we are one of the largest community organizing networks in the country.
That's
We
great.
organize about 750,000 families across California. We've got 10 chapters across the state, and we primarily work on social and economic equity issues, specifically things like universal basic wage, affordable housing and homelessness, and restorative justice like criminal justice reform.
That's awesome. We just took the while we were in between what I was just reading some news articles. So in between that and talking with you, we went over the like about us section on Pico to get like a little bit of a sense. Oh, I almost forgot. Your pronouns as well. I know them, but for chat.
Oh, he, him. Sorry.
Thank you. Uh, but thanks so much for speaking with me. That's I'm glad you can come on. You are in fact my first. I was gonna say my first guest, my first human guest. We did have my sister's dog was on once. Um,
Which
but,
is way more entertaining than I'm going to be, but I will do that.
Only slightly cuter. Only slightly. But uh, we have like a vague idea, I guess, of what Pico works on because of like what you just said and what we were reading in the like about us. Is there any like specific stuff that's going on right now that you find like kind of interesting about, like, to concretize it a bit, I guess?
Sure. Um, so I mean, you know me pretty well, so I can talk about our legislative agenda, or I can more so talk about like the kind of larger narrative work that we do. I can do both. It's really it's really up to you. I've got until 4, so we can talk in as much depth as you'd like.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I actually forgot to ask how long you have. I figured you're packed with meetings all the time, all day. Why don't we start with what would you find more pressing to talk about? Like, what's like on your docket that you've got on your mind?
Um, so I think probably just like if you're talking about concretizing the issue more,
Yeah.
our our legislative agenda for the year is probably more digestible for folks who are going to watch or people that are here. So our legislative agenda this year is our Home is Sacred campaign, which is the shirt I'm wearing actually.
Nice. That's a cool
Um,
shirt.
yeah, thanks. So we made the logo and all that good stuff, and it's a package of 5 bills, all of which have to do with affordable housing, homelessness, renter protections, etc. So um, we've been working on that all year, and we're going to continue to do that until you know late September, mid October, depending on when the governor, if and when the governor signs all 5 of our bills. All of the bills have to do with different elements of the housing crisis. So I don't know how familiar you are with the 3 Ps of housing.
Oh no, assume I'm a moron, and we can we can just look into the stuff as
Sure.
we talk.
So like housing advocates, you probably know this because you live in California and you're a human that reads, but like most people know, the number one, two, three, four, five issue in California is housing. It's just like how do you live anywhere and afford it, right? So all the public research, I do a lot of public research and polling, trying to understand, where the electorate's at, so that we can either, you know, uh, use messages or framing or speak to audiences that are persuadable, so that we can actually pass our agenda and get the political and capital will from a plurality of Californians to create enough pressure to get our policies passed. So whenever we do these researches, I mean, it's obvious that housing is the main issue in California. Like it's not particularly close. And so obviously there's a lot of really smart people working on this stuff, and the housing, I'd say housing advocates have boiled down like how to solve this into 3 major buckets. They call it the 3 Ps. It's protection, preservation, and production. So protection for people that are currently housed to avoid displacement, right? People that are getting evicted for whatever reason, right? So protecting tenants,
Hmm.
preservation of existing affordable housing for lower and middle income families, and then production of new housing, new affordable housing specifically at all income levels. So, all of our bills have to do with those broad elements. I'd say because we primarily work with low income families, protection has become a big deal for us, mostly because production can kind of get co-opted by developers, and um, California doesn't have a Republican Party to speak of.
Hmm.
So what the corporate agenda has done has just carved out an element of the Democratic Party and made them Republicans, even though they still have a D in front of their name. So like the same people that take like oil, pharma, and real estate and developer money in say like Tennessee or in Congress would just now be the moderate Democrats in California.
Okay.
So um, so production, this notion that we can just build our way out of the housing crisis is not really true. So we do a lot of work on protecting tenants. You know,
Okay. Yeah, because
so
you mentioned the production thing, and I immediately the thing that comes to my mind is, well, there was a lot of production of housing going on in the early 2000s, but that didn't have any impact on housing rates because it was all getting bought up by speculators. So I guess it
Yeah,
makes sense that like protection would be a big thing. I mean, that it seems is that like kind of like the eviction moratoriums that we saw during COVID, like that kind of stuff that you'd work on.
like that. So eviction moratoriums. There's just a lot of ways that landlords, specifically corporate landlords that own a lot of property, screw renters. So like until we passed a bill in 2018 that caps the amount that a landlord can raise your rent yearly, there didn't used to be a cap. You know what I mean? Like your landlord could just raise your rate. Um, so there's a lot of like minutia here to go into things like Costa Hawkins or the Ellis Act. There are a lot of different things that we've tried to do so that tenants and renters have rights and protections against landlords. But corporate landlords have gotten pretty sneaky, and they find a lot of loopholes. Specifically, like one thing that's become like a really bad thing in California and very widespread is something called rent evictions. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like a portmanteau of renovations and evictions. So, like one way you can circumvent the rent cap is by saying we're renovating, or there's this like minor code issue we have to fix, and then they'll renovate, and what they'll really do is just like slap a new coat of paint on the kitchen cabinets, but then evict the tenant and put it back on the market for like double a rate, because the the market is always going at a higher pace than what renters than the cost of living. So
Right.
like that's the fundamental issue, right? Is that the cost of living is being far outpaced by how expensive it is by how the housing market like operates. So there's a lot of little stuff like that, like things called like no fault evictions.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to stop you before we get into the next thing because the
Yeah,
what you just mentioned seems like the kind of thing that shouldn't be possible or legal. Like a landlord can simply evict someone so they can do a renovation. I would assume that that's not a thing.
totally legal. It's completely legal. Like yeah, it's totally legal in California. In fact, there's a place called Barrington Plaza in LA. It's got like 270 units. It's a huge apartment complex.
Yeah, it's massive.
Um, yeah, and they evicted almost all the tenants in that apartment building because they were saying that they needed to fix the plumbing. Um, as it turns out, the plumbing was okay. What they were really doing was like adding a gym and like a yoga, like they were turning the apartment building, which was an affordable housing apartment building, into a swanky apartment building, and then they put the entire apartment building and all the units back on the market within 6 months at 350% of what the previous renters were paying,
Gross.
because that was the going market rate for like a fancy schmancy apartment building. And so by law, they're like, yeah, you can move back in here totally, but then like you can't
Can't afford
afford
that rent anymore. Yeah.
it. And so like the protections in place are quite frankly totally pathetic, dude. Like they'll give you like a 2 week stipend to stay at a hotel if you're lucky. And then one of the big issues, and this is less in LA and San Francisco and more in a lot of other places in California, is like there's nowhere for renters to turn. So like there are some laws on the books and there are some renter protections. What there isn't is enforcement. So like landlords can do all kinds of illegal shit, and like what's the recourse?
Yeah. Just
Like
what are you gonna do about it?
what are you gonna do? Like
Yeah.
the only recourse sometimes is like civil court, and if you're working two jobs and you're about to get evicted and you need to fucking have a place for your kid to sleep, like you're not gonna go fill out small court claims paperwork and take your you know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Who
especially
has the effort for
or
it?
especially if your landlord's a corporate developer who always has more money and attorneys than you. So it's just
And it's cheaper to pay their lawyers than it is to give you what you want. Yeah.
oh yeah, big time. So yeah,
I guess one of the things that was also coming up as you were talking about what you work on is it seems really obvious that you're trying to condense the immense amount that you know on the subject into something that's kind of bite sized and that we can wrap our heads around. So I guess would it be easier than to talk about something like really specific that Pico's working on in this end that doesn't require us to know the amount that you seem to about it. Like, are there any
So
like initiatives going on right now? Because one of the directions I want to point this towards, at least at some point, is to say like, okay, well, what can we do to like help towards this end?
sure. Especially because you talk a lot about like debate and kind of discourse on
Yeah.
your channel. A lot of the work that I do, both at Pico and just for I've studied this for most of my life, is like um, how do people think about these issues? How do they perceive them? And then moving them towards the direction is that makes them more likely to vote or advocate in the direction that we want, right? So like if you think about, you know, housing or, you know, wage or labor as like skyscrapers, those each of those is one monumental task to move, right?
Right.
Um, a lot of what I've studied for most of my life is foundational attitudes, like lodestone ideologies that I call them like tectonic plates, like under the skyscrapers, where it may take 20 or 30 years to shift it a few feet, but if you do, the skyscrapers are way easier to just topple, right?
Yeah.
So like, yes, we work on housing, yes, we work on a lot of stuff, but something that I'm in for the long haul is like fundamental attitudes towards the economy or society. So like, for example, one foundational attitudinal prevailing like way of thinking, no matter whether you're Democrat or Republican, obviously if you're like super far lefty, but like most people, even most Democrats, if you ask them the question, what is more, what, which do you agree with more? Or which is more the case? If your conditions in your life, are they more because of your individual choices or the systems around you? Most people will say your individual choices,
I
right?
think it feels better to think of the world in that way.
Yes, of course, right? And so, well, maybe I would argue it probably feels well.
I guess it depends on your circumstances. If things are going well, you're like, ah, yeah, that's all me. And if things are going poorly, it feels better to be like, well, that's not my fault.
Well, what's interesting is
But you want to feel like you have control.
even the majority of people who are living in harsh conditions think individual choices have more impact on your material conditions than systems do. So like that, if you can shift a sizable amount of the electorate or just people on that one issue, right? Like individualist first systems type thinking over 20 or 30 years, you can fundamentally change how people want to vote on issues. Like this is something that the right is incredibly good at. Like what
Mm-hmm.
the left is really good at is like voter registration, canvassing, like organizing, right? We do a lot of organizing.
Which is
We're
great.
we're one of the biggest community organizing networks in California and in the country.
That's
The
awesome.
left is amazing at community organizing. People like relational canvassing, phone banking, door knocking, turning people out, right? What the right is incredibly good at is narrative change, culture change, like long term culture shifts that shift how, like, the center of American politics.
Yeah.
So I always use the example of like the Dobbs case, the abortion case,
Yeah, I
right?
was going to say the same thing. Yeah, they've been working on Roe v. Wade for 50 years.
50 years, right? And you've got the Federalist Society, and something that I talk to with funders a lot. We're a nonprofit, and so we work a lot with funders and
Right.
grants. Something that I have to do a lot in my work is funder education. So I always do these like long arcs, like the heritage, like the Federalist Society has had $171 million over 40 years to shift people, how people think about the like the abortion issue, or more germane to California, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association has had a budget of north of $200 million since the 1960s, just for one North Star issue: make Californians equate taxes with bad. Like taxes are bad. That's it. It's that like it's really not rocket science. It's a simple thing. It's like taxes are government taking money out of your pocket. That's it. But like the left doesn't do that kind of long-term investment. We do a lot more of the short term, which is what we're kind of talking about a little bit. But
Yeah,
like, it's the next. My dad always used to say that the right falls in line and the left falls in love. Like we're very like
I like that.
squirrel, like squirrels kind of with our attention span. So we'll say like, oh my God, Bernie, all in, or like, this thing, all in, and we're very campaign to campaign. And then even our funders, some of our biggest mega donors, end up just becoming like dummies that run for office themselves, like Tom Steyer, right? Like there isn't the infrastructure of funding, messaging, and narrative that's capable of shifting attitudes on fundamental issues over the long haul. One big example of this is like people think government is bad. And granted, sure. Like
Yeah, I mean, obviously it all depends,
I'm
but
not,
yeah,
I'm not saying like yes, politicians or the systems of government
right.
are very flawed, but government can be a massive force for equity,
Yeah,
right? And like part of the issue is if you strip down government, like the government is the only system capable of enforcing any level of a social safety net that's worth a damn. And the thing that I always try to do in terms of like messaging is like there are two massive choices we have in terms of like who is controlling society and the flow of money and resources, government or private industry, like the market and corporations. What me as a person can't do is influence how a board of directors at a corporation votes
not
because
unless you're one of them.
they don't give a shit about me, and no
No,
amount of pressure I have no mechanism of putting my thumb on the scales of those board of directors. They are beholden to their stockholders, the market, and themselves. Bar none. There's nothing I can do. Government is more of a blank slate. Of these two options, it's the one that we have the ability to put our thumb on the scales of.
I like that
So,
way of thinking because
so
it's
it's
like,
not that
oh, sorry,
government
go
is
ahead.
it's not that government is inherently good or bad. It's that the social contract has mechanisms in place that allow for the participation and influence of people who otherwise wouldn't have power.
I like that way of thinking because I think a lot of people, especially in larger states like California, feel very often that they don't really have any political impact. Like I have one vote among 55 million votes in even in cases where it could matter. But I do like that outside of the way you lay it out of like that is more control than you have over private systems. That is something. And I assume you would also be in favor of tools to increase the amount of political will a citizen can enact. But like even that one vote, it's something. It's at least
Yeah,
something.
of course. And like the other thing that we try to do a lot of in terms of like voter education is like I think people obviously yes, they feel very disenfranchised, they feel very hopeless towards like their ability to influence the government. Except it's like it's way more than you actually think. Like we like a lot of the stuff we've worked on. I'll give you wanted one very concrete
Yeah.
example, so I'll kind of go from the 10,000 foot view back to the like very granular.
Yeah.
What one of our bills is SB 567. It's the Homelessness Prevention Act, and it's a sweeping renter protections bill. So it would enforce a lot of laws on the books for renters to be able to not be evicted for no fault reasons. So that's the gist of it. SB 567 was going to die really early on in the
Mm-hmm.
legislative cycle. So the California Apartment Association, California Association of Realtors, these are two massively powerful lobbies who absolutely do not want any more renter protections on the books. There are 50 state senators and 96 state assembly members. I'm going to give you a guess. How many of those 146 members of the California legislature have not taken money from the CAA or CAR?
Oh no. I'm gonna go with like 10%.
Zero.
Zero? Actually zero? Wow.
Actually, zero. So
I thought I was being pessimistic.
zero. Zero. All of them have taken money from CAA and CAR. Now, does that mean that all of them are in their pockets? Absolutely not. Does it mean that CAA and CAR have massive influence in Sacramento? Yes. So,
I mean, it also implies that like, this is something I've talked about on a previous stream of just like, it doesn't mean that now these politicians are going to do everything that these lobby groups want them to do, but you got like, aren't these lobby groups more likely to fund politicians that are already in agreement with them? You know.
and it's less funding. It's I call it like I call it the phone call test. Like
Mm-hmm.
when people ask, we so again we do a lot of funder education, and when people ask the question like, do we have power, right? What I advocate is for them to do the phone call test. If you're an organization or a company or an advocate or whatever, do the phone call test. Call your local assembly member or state senator. Do they pick up your call? So like if you max out to them every cycle, or if you're a lobbyist and donor who's well known in Sacramento, they're gonna pick up your call. That doesn't mean they're always gonna vote for you, vote for what you want, but they'll take your call, and that's more access than most people have, right?
Yeah, you can talk to them at
So
least.
yeah, exactly. A good way to think of it is like, I'll get to that in a minute. So, so SB 567 was going to die really, really early. Okay, um, it hasn't. So it went through the Senate through 3 committees. It went through the state assembly 2 committees with a chair who is very hostile towards the bill, and it's en route to passing. The governor should pass this bill in mid-September if things don't go horribly wrong.
And remind me, what is this bill supposed to do again?
This is a massive tenant protections act.
Okay.
So this would make it so that rent evictions become actually illegal, and there's enforcement for it. So you can actually there are county and city and state enforcement mechanisms that dissuade landlords from evicting people for no fault reasons. No fault evictions are any evictions that aren't because someone didn't pay for 90 or more days. So you just can't evict people. This would be a sweeping change to renter protections in California, and it would harm a lot of the bottom line of these lobbyists, right? Why has this bill not died?
Why is it?
It's just organizing.
Okay.
Like at every single step of the way, right? So every one of these bills, every one of these policies, they're all little battles, right? Every committee is a battle. Every maybe vote is a battle. There's always it's always contested. Unless a bill is just going to fly through and nobody cares about it, right? There's always a contest. Usually our opposition wins the contest. This time we got an entire housing coalition together. PICO, the Million Voters Project, Housing Now, Act LA. We got a coalition of 10 organizations across California. And we created a roadmap really early in January. And we were like, here are all the steps that we need to go through for this bill to pass. And before each step, we would say, here's our opposition, here's our yes votes, here are our no votes. What do we need to do? What do the left have? People, right? We may not have the messaging or the money, but we have people that we can organize. So at every single step of the way, for example, if you go back, it's been through 5 committees now. Every committee in Sacramento that this bill went through, we had 75 to 100 people packing the room advocating for the bill.
That's awesome.
And ahead of that, we'd be doing tweet storms and hundreds of phone calls and emails for weeks ahead of the vote to the targeted legislator that we knew was going to be on the other side. And so that pressure, these are all people that want to get reelected. Politicians, their number one interest is their self-interest. There's term limits in California. People in the assembly are up for reelection every 2 years. People in the state senate every 4 years, and you can only serve a total of 12 years in the California legislature, which means they're always playing musical chairs. When they're done in the legislature, they need to run for mayor or city council or whatever the hell. So the pressure that you can create by letting them know there's a spotlight on you. Thousands of people are watching your vote. The way that our opposition and forces that kind of organize against our best interests tend to win is because they operate in so much complexity and darkness. Their their aim is to make people feel hopeless. But when we have turned 20 people out to a meeting with a state senator, that has massive impact. Like literally, just 20 people come into this dude's office and they're like, "Hey, here's my story. I'm a renter. This is happening to me. This is happening to my mom." And on down the line, they all have a story. They're all talking about like they're wearing their shirts. They've got their logo. They're like, "Look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to fight for this until the very end." That's power. And that is power that can actually contest the other power, because other in absence of organizing, a bill like this would have died. So it's exhausting, obviously,
Oh yeah, of course.
right? I know it's right. It's
Yeah.
exhausting, but people showing up for an hour or two, telling your story, making a phone call, sending an email, it all matters. It does matter whether people think it does or doesn't. It doesn't. Like it does.
And it's really cool that you don't really need like it feels, it feels overwhelming. You're trying to change policy in a state. It feels like you have to have all this sway. And it's pretty uplifting to be like, yeah, these 20 people. That's not a lot. That's you and your friends. You know, can have such a huge impact. You don't have to sway millions of people. You start with swaying 2 people.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
that's pretty cool.
if they're key enough people, right? If they're key people, or if it's targeted, then you can have an impact.
That's great. I think it's really easy to get defeatist, and I appreciate the opposition to it because I don't think it's. I mean, obviously, it's not helpful
Yeah,
to have that kind of mindset.
yeah. You've played League with me. I'm not defeatist.
Uh, I don't. I can't believe you just outed me as playing a league as playing League of Legends, which I've already talked about on stream. This is not news, but still, I find that very rude. Uh,
And it's
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead.
Can I add one more quick thing?
Oh, please go ahead.
Yeah. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
What one way one something that we do a lot in terms of building, power and combating disenfranchisement and kind of hopelessness
Hmm.
is people don't really understand this stuff, right? It's so complicated and it feels so large and amorphous that it's really easy for someone to just check out and just be like, nah, fuck it. I don't like it's beyond me. I don't really, I don't have the time to understand it. What I've noticed and what a lot of research has shown
Hmm.
is that knowledge about how to understand and engage with systems of power increase emotional empowerment. I know that was kind of a complicated sentence. I'll say it again. Like, knowledge
Hmm.
about how power operates makes people feel more empowered,
Yeah, it doesn't feel as alien. It feels like more accessible.
which is a positive feedback loop. So,
Yeah.
for example, something we do a lot. I won't get into it now because I don't want to bore everybody. But we do power maps. So this looks very complicated to start, but it starts like this. All our power maps. You teach someone who works like minimum wage, right? Who's a renter, who doesn't know anything about this stuff.
Hmm.
You teach them a power map. You just have them do so. Like, all right, let's say Adam, you live where? Like in
Uh,
LA.
just for the stream, I know I usually go by my middle name, but I go by my first name on stream, Ernest.
Oh, Ernest.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so Ernest, you live in Los Angeles.
yeah.
What's something you care about in LA?
Well, I mean, housing is a big thing.
Okay.
We can go with that.
So, so let's just say you care about housing. Okay. This is a template for a power map, right? It's the x-axis is diehard support or to right. It's how much they support your agenda versus how much they oppose it, and then the y-axis is how much power they have. Like can get attention, take into account major influence, active participant, and then decisive power. If you take a few hours and teach someone how to build this out, and this is like what's our narrative, what's the dominant narrative, what's the oppositional narrative,
Hmm.
and then you start mapping. So like who is where, right? Obviously you got these guys way over here, right? You see they're high on power, high on opposition, and on down the line, right?
Right.
And you just keep building. Okay, anti-tax, right to quality education. These are all power, like major influence opposition. Here's taken into account / major influence super supportive. Things like minimum wage and pandemic relief are kind of centrist ideologically. You build and build. So all I have to say is you do that a little bit with someone. You do it with a group of people. And all of a sudden, for you, Ernest, you're like, okay, now I kind of understand. Like, where do I need to start? What are a couple things I can do um, that will meaningfully influence the thing I care about in my area? So that kind of stuff can be helpful.
That's pretty interesting. It reminds me a bit because so software engineers like to feel like they've invented everything that's come up before, but it reminds me a lot of what software engineers talk about as agile development. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No,
But
I
basically,
the term, I don't know what they are.
agile development is basically a strategy for how you're going to get to it. You know what you want to accomplish, and the question is, how do we get there? And you could map it all out. Agile development says, don't worry, we'll figure out how we get there by taking a step, and then we'll see like, okay, how far are we from like where we need to go? Maybe we adjust our course. And it seems like it's a little bit of that of like, okay, right now this is very low on support, but like, but on the other axis it's improving. So we got to readjust and kind of like you end up snaking your way and readjusting. Uh, just through small steps. I think we lost your audio unless you didn't say anything just there.
No, can you hear me?
Oh, okay. We're good. I thought you said something, but I didn't hear anything, so I was like, oh, my bad.
Yeah.
But that's really cool. Well, I guess on the subject of feeling like you can do something, what can people do to support Pico causes?
Good question. Here, hold on.
So as I say, defeatism is not something I want to promote. So like, let's get people involved. Like, what can you do? And you can do something to support these causes that are good causes.
There. Go. Where can I like put something in chat?
I can put it in chat if you like, or if you can have it over to my stream on Kick. Kick.com/urgent.
Here, I'll send it to you on Discord.
Yeah, for sure, and I'll pop it in the chat.
Put that stream, put that link in the chat. We built out this system for bringing people into the fold.
And I'll put it in the description when I upload this to YouTube as well.
Yeah. So you don't have to be a person of faith. You don't even necessarily have to be spiritual. We take a lot of action all the time. Emails, calls, wherever you are in California, we have a presence. And we're moving our entire agenda. So if you want to get involved, go to this website and just put in your name and phone number. We will be in touch.
That's pretty easy.
Easy.
And that's good too because it feels like it's so monumental. It's really nice to be like, hey, what should I do? We'll let you know. Like we'll help you out.
Yep. Or like this, for example, something concrete someone could do today is this. Specifically for SB 567. It's still moving along. Legislators are on recess until August 14th. We actually think it's a lot of fun to flood emails and voicemails while legislators are on recess because they come back and they're all full. And then they go, oh, why is my voicemail full? It's all people saying support SB 567. So this is, if people go here to this website on New Mode, and New Mode is like one of the ways to take action, you can automatically patch through and send something.
That's the power of collective action. I mean, for you, it's a 3-minute phone call. For the person whose inbox is full, that's hours of people telling them what they think. I have a question from the chat if you're open to taking it.
Sure, what's
up? So Kim Gallon chat says, I know someone in California who got a 25% rent increase with only 30 days of advance notice. Is that legal?
Yes.
That sucks. That's yeah.
So, well, first,
I assume there's a lot of like nuance of like where exactly and all this stuff.
If the place was rent controlled or if it was subject to the Ellis Act, then no. If it wasn't, then yes. But the overwhelming issue is whether it was functionally legal or not. What could your friend have done about it?
Yeah, and on top of that, like even if it's legal, that doesn't like it's still not okay. And that's something to import. Legal and moral don't overlap perfectly, and that's
exactly
what your organization works towards fixing, right?
Yes, and like exactly, moral and legal don't always line up, but also like this, like legality only goes so far, right? If you like, what is if a law is totally toothless? What like if you're a corporate? Have you ever heard of Blackstone?
No, I'm not familiar.
So Blackstone is the largest corporate landlord in California. There's a whole. I encourage people to look up the Blackstone report. We actually worked on this a lot this year, and there's a lot of very interesting things in there that I think you and the chat would be into. Um, so Blackstone is California's largest corporate landlord. If you look at their profit margins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, would you, if you're them, and that's your, what your bottom line is, do you take the risk or do you not, depending on what power the renter has? Of course you do. Like, even if something is gray in the legal department, right? If something's just categorically completely illegal, no. But most of this stuff is so gray. You can say like, oh, it was subject to the Ellis Act, or they didn't pay their rent 6 months ago, so technically it was of cause, even though it was delayed. Like there are so many ways for landlords to get around this stuff. And if you're a tenant, again, you're working minimum wage, one or two jobs, trying to support your family. You just don't have the legal knowledge or the time
You
or
have
the
so
effort
much less
or mental
power.
capacity. Yeah, you don't. Like, how do you fight, right? And so there's this picture. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like there's a picture that was taken out in the wild. It was like a school of fish that kind of they like got into the shape of a larger fish,
Mm-hmm.
and they made it looks like the shape they made is eating a shark,
Mm-hmm.
like, and the shark is running away, right? And so it's like a nice little it's a nice little metaphor, right? Like
Right.
one of those fish couldn't do anything, but yeah, if you band together, you show you have power.
Yeah. Power of collective action seems
Yeah.
pretty big. I think I've pulled up. You're talking about the Blackstone quarterly report,
No, that's
or
their quarterly
oh,
report.
okay,
So,
okay.
I put in, I sent you something on Discord.
Oh, okay, I see it.
But I'll send you the like actual, like this mentions one of the bills we're working on, which would amend California's constitution to include housing as a human right, which would fundamentally change California's constitution in terms of how city and county charters are able to allocate their budgets, for example. Um, and so exposing the Blackstone report and how much they donate to people and whatnot has been a huge like part of that. So this is a pretty cool article. There's a lot of good stuff in here.
Okay. I link that in chat. I'll put it in the description. Maybe we'll read it on stream. Probably not today, but maybe another instance.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I remember you had mentioned to me prior that effort towards making housing a human right. Um, I know that's the kind of like a big thing, right? To give a kind of a sense to people watching, what could someone do to like support that kind of initiative, something on the larger scale? We've seen how you can help with the small stuff. Let's see how, like, is there anything you can do to help with the bigger things, the bigger projects?
So ACA 10 is a assembly constitutional amendment that is currently before the California legislature. The California legislature. We're working on it with a lot of different, a massive coalition in California is working on this. It was billed by Assemblymember Haney, who's from, gosh, he's from San Diego. I should really know this. But yeah, it's currently there from San Francisco. It's in the legislature right now. I just linked the ACA 10.
Oh, I found it myself as well.
Yeah, so it's there now. ACE is a huge partner organization of ours. That's they're a bunch of housing advocates, and so they're working on ACA 10. I would say that the best way to like take action on it is go here. They've set up, and then we all kind of pool our resources. So like we work with ACE a lot. Yeah, so like get involved.
Okay.
Like if you put your information here, like we'll plug you in. There's plenty to do.
That's awesome. Um, I guess changing subjects a little bit, because I know you don't have that much more time before you got to get off to your next place. And thank you so much for talking with me, informing my chat and all that.
Huh.
But I remember in the last local election, Pico had the like Pico Voters Guide, which I found very helpful. Is like, okay, this is an organization that knows a lot more than I do,
Yeah.
whose beliefs align very much with mine. Like
Yeah.
I can learn a lot from this. Is there an interest in doing that going forward with subsequent elections, and even like to broader scales?
Yeah, that and then some. So like, especially a lot of my job, like being more in the realm of like narrative strategy and communications, is like public education, right? And so, yes, we will be doing a lot more of that and a lot more public education around. So I think one thing that I've found less helpful, like I'm glad you found it helpful, and they are very helpful. Sometimes I think just saying like, "Here's your voter guide" is a good first step, but maybe not all we can do.
Agreed.
More education on what the bill, like what we're advocating for and why. And one thing that I think doesn't happen nearly enough that we could do more of is voter education when it's not just the election cycle. So like the election is the next major election is November of next year, right? But in those 3 months leading up to the election, from July or August of 2024 to election day, people are inundated with mail and texts and 50 fucking spam emails from Nancy Pelosi asking for money, and it's
Yep.
like you just tune out. You tune out. You know what I mean? Like it's complete overload. And one thing that I've done a lot in my work and that I've tried to research and build on is that people tend to trust you more when you are talking to them, engaging them, educating them, and moving them into power when it's not just convenient for you. So, one thing that we do a lot in our whole coalition, there's like me and like three other narrative strategists in California that kind of try to move the larger coalition narrative strategy in California, is like, don't just wait until next summer. Like do outreach now. Do outreach and public education sooner. Do it consistently. Let people know what's going on, so that when the time comes to have a voter guide, people will trust what you have to say more. They'll actually read more of it and be more engaged with it instead of just it being another piece of information that they get at the last minute.
Yeah.
But the short answer to your question is yeah, definitely. We'll be doing a lot more of
Well, I'm glad you gave the long answer because that is really interesting, and it's something that I notice is that the right does do very well because,
that.
like, NRA members are screaming about how they want to take your guns even when nothing is happening,
Yeah, right.
and like that kind of energy is like I wish it were directed better, but it's enviable,
Yeah, exactly.
and so like you say, it's good to do that outreach ahead of time, get people interested. That's also why like a lot of this housing stuff. This is ongoing. It's not, it looks like,
Right.
from the position of the average citizen, like it looks like you participate in democracy once every voting cycle. But this stuff is
Yes,
happening all the time,
all the time.
just constantly. I
All
mean,
in
uh,
fact,
yeah.
it's like when you say all the time, like boy, you don't know how right you are, right? Like people
I've
even
heard how
think
your schedule looks. I have an idea.
no, no, no. Like people think like, oh, even now, like the legislators are on break. Okay,
Yeah.
right. So, oh, I guess we get to take a break. Nope. Like there's a whole we've got Home is Sacred Summer happening right now, where we're doing public actions all across California. We did one in Santa Clara, which is like in San Jose, on the 23rd. We're doing one in San Diego on Sunday. The Sunday one's going to be hundreds of like Jesuits like doing a procession from their like collection of churches to the assembly member's office, Assembly Member Alvarez. We're doing one in Sacramento on the 9th. We're doing one in the Inland Empire on the 18th. We're doing one in Humboldt County on the 31st. There's one happening in LA, Bay Area, the Central Valley, East Bay. These things are happening all the time because we want to use this time to move how people think about this stuff. We want to influence legislators early. We want to we want to always not only be in the face of power all the time, but always let people know that there is tons to do all the time when it comes to creating the society we want. It is not just voting. If that's all you want to do, if you want to be a passive receiver of messages and vote once every year, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But make no mistake, if you want to actually engage with power and be an instrumental part of changing the conditions of people in your community, you can be. That's not beyond your power or ability. Whether or not you make minimum wage or you graduated college, it doesn't matter. Like that's the thing about organizing, is that it has nothing. It is color, class, and race blind. It's like, are you a person? Are you in solidarity with others? Do you want a better world? Trust me, there's something to do.
And to just reinforce how easy that can be. I mean, sounds like for these events, just being there is a thing you've done. You know, that's a head counted. Look how many people showed up to this event, and that means something. People, politicians in particular, take that seriously.
To mention, especially when you have, obviously, like we're not Fox, but I've worked really hard to build a little bit of a messaging infrastructure in California. And so we've got a little bit of like juice behind this stuff. So I do press outreach. I have relationships with journalists. We're driving press to these events that are coming. We've got, people that are writing op-eds so that there's more visibility. Not to mention these events where people engage with power are opportunities for like flashes in the pan. So one example is like, there's someone named Ashby. She's a senator from Sacramento.
Mm-hmm.
She's a very moderate Democrat. She was very anti SB 567, the Homelessness Prevention Act. And so we had a big action in Sacramento. There was like hundreds of people on the west side of the Sacramento Capitol. And part of the action was, we're going to go to the legislative offices and have lunch with these legislators, right? A whole group of people from Sacramento went to Ashby's office, and they were very polite, right? They're incredibly nice. These are people of faith. They're usually like older. They're religious. They're very sweet. And they had already set up a lunch, but her scheduler was like, "No, sorry, you can't come in. Oh, the senator's busy. Blah blah blah." Just feeding them a line of bullshit, right?
Right.
And so there was a lady with her young son, and she was just kind of following. She was like kind of just looking, and she saw through the door. She sees Ashby. She sees the senator. She's right there. And so Ashby has to go to another meeting, and so they just wait. They just wait for like half an hour. They're not doing anything. They're just hanging out, eating lunch. And as she's going to the elevator, this lady and her son was like, "Hey, can we please just talk about housing in your area? We had a lunch with you. We'd love to take some time." And this lady just turns around. She's like, "No, sorry," and like waves her off. Waves her off. Goes to the elevator. People were recording this stuff, right? And so they brought it to me. I was downstairs, and they were like, "Hey, this thing just happened." And I was like, "Cool, propaganda." And like, so we were like, we did like hashtag it's hashtag absent Ashby,
Mm-hmm.
and I sent it to all my coalition members. I sent it to the press, and literally overnight. It's not a big deal, but like 1,700 people like reshared this or whatever. They went from 2 months of not being able to get one lunch with this state senator to the next morning, her district director called the Sacramento affiliate and was like, "Hey, we'd love to meet." And then she voted for our bill when it came to her committee the week after. Like,
And that's one person. That's one
that's
person
one
happened
person,
to say something.
one person. They were there with a small group. All they did was just hang out for a bit, and they captured something. All you need is just people and just time and persistence. And then, if you have a little bit of messaging infrastructure and some savvy, you can turn it into something. And this person, like Ashby, ended up being an instrumental vote in this committee. It wouldn't have passed if not for her committee. And you think of that, it's like, oh, who cares? But you're like, okay, that action is partially responsible for 1.6 million Californians who are on the verge of being evicted for BS reasons. It is the difference between them having a roof over their head and not, because one person gets an outsized vote because she's the chair of the committee and she's in the pockets of the CAA. Like, but think of how large that is, and then you bring it down to like, people showed up
Yeah.
and they exerted their power. So like, Yeah.
And it could be that one person who, right place, right time, did something that's noteworthy. It could be, one time instead of 100 people coming for lunch, it was 5,000, and that says something too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's exactly right.
All right. Well, you said you have until 4. It is nearly 4, so I'll let you go and prep for your next meeting. But I do want to thank you so much for coming on and talking with me. Learned a lot. We'll put all those links into the description of this when I upload it to YouTube. And if there's anything else you want me to put in there, just shoot it on over, and I'd be happy to do that.
Thanks, man. Happy to come on. Have me on anytime.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Bye then.
Bye.
Well, I think that was awesome. It was really great to talk to someone who knows about this kind of thing. We have a lot of cool stuff a lot of cool resources he gave us. As I say, if you want to check this out when I upload this VOD to YouTube, I will put all of that in the description. I'll try to remind myself of what each of these links are before I put it in there so I can give you some context. I'm glad you find it interesting, Camgal. Yeah, I do think talking with local organizers is a really big deal. Politics feels so weird and alien, especially when it's on a national scale. And I know we talk about national politics more than anything else because it's just that wide universality, everyone knows and can talk about it. People outside of California, if they watch this, aren't going to have much in the way of interaction with stuff that Pico's working on, except you realize that it works like this everywhere. Every state has these kinds of organizations. California has many of them. Calvin mentioned a bunch at the start, and it's accessible. There is stuff you can do, and most notably, I want to remind everyone about this take action link, because action seems like it can be very easy. It could be making a phone call and leaving a message. You don't even have to talk to someone. I know that can be kind of I don't like talking on the phone. There's a lot of apprehension that can go into oh, I got to talk to a stranger and have my thoughts. It could be write out what you're gonna say. Here's the 3-minute voicemail. It might be show up to an event. It could be any number of things, and they'll tell you what it is. So if you just go to picocalifornia.org/take action, another link I will put in the description and is already in the chat. You just put in, your name, your email, your phone number, zip code, and they'll let you know what you can do, how you can help. And you don't have to be there for everything. You don't have to do the most, but doing even a little has an impact. As we saw, that one person happened to show up. She just happened to be there, and she happened to see that this committee head was passing by, and she could say something. And that's all it takes sometimes. The Million Man March that MLK did was great. Having 1 million people showing that kind of support, but even one person can make a difference. I'm not about defeatism. I don't like defeatism. I know everyone sinks into it from time to time, but I think this was a wonderful way to see that there's stuff you can do. You shouldn't feel defeated. I know sometimes you can. I'm not saying it's wrong to feel that way. I'm just saying that you're not defeated. There's stuff you can do and you can help. And making housing a human right in California. Do you have any idea how impactful that would be? As you said, 1.6 million Californians will be affected by this kind of change, and with enforcement and all this other stuff, it would allow, it would mean that you have a right to a home, which you should. And I don't mean you, the nebulous. I mean you personally have a right to a home and should have that protected. This is one of the good things government can do. And so I think we saw a lot of stuff to be optimistic about there. And it was great. I really appreciate, Calvin, if you watch this back. Thank you again so much for telling us more about this stuff. I'm sure we'll have him on again in the future, just because, as we saw, he was struggling to condense the amount that he knows on the subject into something that was accessible to us. So there's doubtless many, many, many things that he could go on about and tell us about in both broad and narrow scopes. So that all said, thanks so much for watching. As I say, remind everyone, there's going to be links in the description. In particular, the Take Action link. I really, really encourage you to 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 try to help. And it can be really, really easy. It's not gonna demand that you take a month off of work to pick it every day or whatever. It doesn't necessarily, it could be as simple as making a phone call, and they'll help you do it. So thanks everyone so much for watching. Don't forget, trying to get that follower goal up. If you want to see more conversations like that, it's going to be a lot easier with more of an audience to speak to. I personally I appreciate Calvin coming on to educate us when there are so few, even so small an audience to benefit from this. But as he said, even that small audience has an impact. Imagine how much more we can do if there are more of us. Collective action. It's important, it's powerful, and it allows our voices to be heard. Never forget that. So thanks so much for watching, everyone, and we'll be back next week. We'll go over the totality of the new the January 6th indictments for Trump, and we'll see what else we get up to next week. But thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.